Hello everyone, I'm Ricky Isaac from the Professional Development Forum team. Today in this episode, we'll be discussing a topic that I'm personally very much excited about, which is the case for diversity. Australia has come a long way to embracing its cultural and demographic diversity. Much ink has been spilled on the ethical and social argument for diversity and inclusion. While these are very important topics that we must revisit every now and then, today we want to be focusing on the business aspect of things. Specifically, what diversity means in a practical way for Australian businesses, how to implement it, and more importantly, how diversity can benefit your organization or business. And I cannot think of a more suited person to talk about this topic with, other than Thang Ngo, the Managing Director of Identity Communications, for reasons that we will get into right now. Not in here, of course. Hi, Thang. Thank you so much for joining me here.
Thanks, Ricky.
Can we start with your company, Identity Communications? So what is it?
Yeah, so Identity Communications is a specialist multicultural marketing agency. So we're part of a bigger group, IPG Mediabrands, which is headquartered in New York. It's strange, but the multicultural marketing space is one where there doesn't have a lot of players, because in the past, people just didn't think multicultural marketing made sense in Australia, which is odd considering 1 in 5 people in Australia speak a language other than English at home.
Exactly.
Well, actually in New South Wales, 1 in 4, and in Sydney, 1 in 3. So the numbers are big, but just no one actually even, no marketers really have thought that much about it until very, very recently.
Yeah. When I was looking at your website, I noticed that you are very data-driven. Like there's just so many data, and well, being like obviously an ethnic minority in Australia, I was quite surprised to find out that there's actually this vast market of people that speak a language other than English.
Yeah, and it's actually quite a profitable market if you think about it.
Yeah.
What happens when a new migrant comes to a country? They have to spend a lot of money. They have to rent, they have to buy a car, they have to buy a bed.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. Have to get fridge, have to literally start afresh. So you can't get a more profitable consumer than a migrant who's just arrived in Australia. I mean, and then the data shows quite obviously Australia's population growth is driven by migrants, not by population growth. We're not having that many babies, but it's the migrants that are driving that growth. And sure, you can have the babies, but you have to wait till the baby turns 18 before they can start buying beds, cars, and everything else.
People are actually warning on media that because of this recent COVID pandemic and the immigration is on the downfall, and that will be impacting Australian economy for the long run.
Yeah, it will, because that's what's driving growth as it is. And if we're seeing it trickle down to zero, that's going to really hurt. And for retailers, that's going to hurt them even more because there aren't any tourists coming in. And tourists from China alone account for over 1 million visitors each year. So that's $1 million, or that's 1 million people who aren't spending money in Australia.
You just said that people were not paying much attention to this vast market. Why do you think that is?
Well, because I think the history of our migration is very different. Like I'm Vietnamese. I came during, obviously after the end of the Vietnam War. So I came in the late 70s, and most migrants came in the 80s, the Vietnamese refugees. So in our mind, and because of all the asylum seeker publicity, in everyone's mind, a migrant is a boat person. So a boat person, uneducated, don't have money, can't speak English, so they're not really very, very valuable as consumers. What they're completely missing is Australia's policies changed dramatically. The majority of our migrants are educated, highly educated, professional, have jobs. So they're actually very, very attractive target audience. So in our head, we see them as kind of worthy, new Australians who need sort of welfare. But the truth is, they don't need welfare. They just need to understand how the laws work, because they're really ready for success.
Yeah, and the argument just doesn't make sense. Me, myself, being the skilled immigrant, I understand that you can't just be anyone and just migrate to Australia, because it's a very merit-based system. Of course, there are other channels like refugees and everything, but the notion that the immigrant community as a whole is here to suck up the blood of Australia is just
Yeah.
cannot be further from the truth.
The humanitarian program, as a percentage of the migration program, is tiny.
Yeah.
It's the skilled education and international students who later on apply for permanent residency.
Yeah.
They make up the bulk of the migrants in Australia. I would give you an example. Around the whole COVID scenario, there's a lot of talk about we need to help migrants, we need to support migrants,
Yes.
and totally true. We need to translate information for migrants. Totally true, and we do that. But you know what? All the data that's coming out have shown that the group that are the most doing the right thing in terms of the right behaviours of wearing masks and doing the right thing are the migrants.
Yeah.
So
the Chinese community has been wearing masks since, I don't know, January?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And but it's just, again, the catch up between Australia's perception of what a migrant is
Yes.
and what a migrant actually does is very different.
Yeah.
And again, looking at the COVID example, what people were focusing on strongly is these housing blocks in Victoria,
Yeah.
where there's been apparently a big outbreak in COVID numbers.
Yes.
And then that is seen as something that we need to help low socio groups, we need to help new migrants, and sure we do.
Yeah.
But what that's forgetting is the majority of all the other migrants are all doing the right thing, and in fact doing more of the right thing than the average Australians.
From the PR perspective, is there any other companies that is doing probably the same thing, and do you have any competitors?
Yeah, there are. The difference is majority of the competitors are independent small shops, where we're a bit luckier because we're part of a big group.
Yep.
So you talked about data. Because we're part of a big group,
Yeah.
we can actually mine a lot of the data. We have systems and processes that does a lot of that. We're a bit lucky from that perspective, but it's also gutsy that the company invested in a multicultural marketing agency in the group in the first place. So they play their cards right, so that they're benefiting from it.
What are the achievements exactly?
Well, I think this year we're growing by about 50% in terms of revenue, and that's something that is unheard of in this climate. But I think more and more, particularly when COVID hits, people start thinking more carefully about how they spend their marketing dollars. They want to know that if I'm investing $1, it's going to give me better returns than not. And then people are starting to think, okay, new migrants, a lot of money, don't have brand loyalty. Let me give you an example. Over here, Telstra is by far the number one mobile player.
Yeah.
But for a new migrant who come from India or Hong Kong, if you talk about a mobile player, they think of Vodafone first. And Vodafone's actually the third biggest player in Australia's market. Yeah. So from that perspective, people like Vodafone go, oh, actually, we're distant third, but for migrants, we're the first thing that people...
Your name is out there.
The name's out there.
Yeah. Could you name a few other achievements that you have achieved over the years?
Yeah, so I think that probably the biggest thing is we worked a lot with government, and government's always been really keen to target multicultural audiences.
Yes.
But what we wanted to do is actually get to government to understand that it's more than ticking the box.
Yep.
That you need to have data, you need to look at insights, and then you need to have proper strategies to target this audience. And to change the mind from needing a helping hand to they just need a hand up. So that's around government and around a lot of the brands. So we work with a lot of bigger brands, Johnson and Johnson, Optus, and Hyundai. So they're kind of brands that now are kind of seeing the value in multicultural Australia.
I noticed on your website that you have a lot of government clients. And in this COVID environment, it's extremely important for the governments to be educating and informing the public. And as you said, the vast portion of that public doesn't even speak English as the first language. So how are you helping them in that regard?
Yeah, there's around almost 5 million Australians who don't speak English well, migrants.
Yeah.
So a lot of it comes around to translation of material.
Yep.
So we do a lot of ads in newspapers, digital, radio to get people to get the message. We put information online. But I think it's more where we're at with COVID at the moment. I think you have to be living under a rock, not to know the right behavior. If you don't know the 1.5 meter by now, if you don't know to wash your hands by now, I mean, no matter who you are, you know, and you see a lot of the signs are intentionally image-based. So it's, you know, I think everybody knows that. I think the challenge we've got at the moment is making sure that people are continuing with the right behavior. They don't lapse, they don't forget, they don't start to kind of try to cheat out of what they need to do. So that's, to me, that's a bigger issue. So that's the behavior, not behavior change, because people have changed their behavior, but that's a behavior sustaining activity that we need people to do.
Is there anything else you're doing other than translating? Like, for example, do you have any specific campaigns for specific groups?
Yes, we do, and the campaigns that we're running for government reaches, for Australian government, reaches 31 language groups. So that's the target audience is 9 out of 10 people who speak a language other than English at home. So that's pretty broad coverage in terms of the audience, and that's across media, publicity, translations, and everything else.
What do you think has changed over the years, both in terms of the demographic as well as how businesses are adapting to this change?
So about 20 years ago, when I was talking to people about the migrant audience, you can actually see marketers' eyes glaze over. They literally are thinking about what shampoo to buy later on. They're thinking about, you know, what their kids are going to do at school when I'm trying to explain to them about the value. And I think what's really changed is the Chinese audience. It's the Chinese audience is so large and so affluent, they've actually made people take notice. So, you know, a lot of the luxury car brands, quite a lot of their sales are coming from just the Chinese audience. So it's a bit corny, but that thing about money talks really does talk. There's nothing, I didn't do anything better now than I did 10, 20 years ago, but it's actually the dollars are speaking. I don't have to speak now. So people are coming to us instead of us having to mine for customers.
From your perspective, over the years, how are the Australian businesses targeting this multicultural segment, and how do you think they're doing?
Yeah, it's still early days because I said, you know, they're only starting now, they're kind of seeing the dollars. So a lot of it, I think, is still well-intentioned, but still quite superficial. So the first kind of dipping the toes in the water for a lot of marketers is around Chinese New Year, because that seems that it's the biggest event.
And it's
extravaganza, and they can see a lot of people congregating, and they can see people spending money. So for them, the Chinese audience is to see red and gold in 8s, because that's generally most, and paper cut rat, paper cut tiger, paper cut whatever the animal is, because that pretty much boils down to multicultural marketing when it comes to the Chinese.
Isn't that a good thing? Or do you think, is there anything that they're really missing?
Well, I think the good thing is that actually they're in the market, they're testing, and they're running campaigns. They're paying attention, and they're investing money. So that's a really good thing. The not so good thing, any marketing textbook tells you that you need to have a point of difference. So if everyone else is going with red, gold, 8s, paper cut animal, and I guarantee you, the coming Lunar New Year, hopefully if COVID subsides, you're going to see the same thing again. So you're not really going to stand out from the rest of the crowd. And the other problem you've got is, does it actually really, it's almost like when you run Christmas advertising, all you do is a Christmas tree baubles in green, and that's all you ever do. If every brand did that on TV, but we don't. That's kind of, there is definitely sophistication there.
There's definitely different perspective that the marketers would target when it comes to Christmas or Valentine's Day and everything like that.
And it's around what it means for families, right? It's about families first. So it stops being about a Christmas tree, and it's about how you express love for your family. And that's what a lot of the good ads are about. And I think that's what we need, the Lunar New Year and the Chinese New Year campaigns, to start to evolve a bit. Otherwise it becomes very two-dimensional, and you know, there's nothing. I mean, I keep on saying it's like trying to out-Chinese the Chinese. Right? You actually can't be more traditional than this is probably more traditional than the Chinese are back in China.
How should they approach other than trying to out-Chinese the Chinese?
Yeah, so they can try and out, well, they actually can't try and out Chinese to Chinese because it's, when you think about it, it's almost insulting, isn't it? Well, it's not winnable, and you're trying to tell them about their customs and their traditions, and you know much less than they do,
exactly.
Right? So you're going to come up short whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
What you can do is show that you're empathetic, you're celebrating with them, so that achieves that purpose. But you go anything beyond that, it starts to look a bit sort of emperor has no clothes. Yep. So in terms of multicultural marketing, what we've done is a lot of brands have come to us and to be fair, they want to do the right thing. They're kind of needing people to join the dots. So they've kind of asked us to consult and go, well, what's the best approach? And we went and reviewed a lot of the multicultural marketing around Chinese New Year to this audience, or just general, actually, how the Australian media depicts diversity, because diversity is the other kind of big thing. It doesn't have to stay at Chinese New Year. Now, diversity is this thing that everyone has to embrace, right?
Yes.
So they come to us and say, well, how do we depict this diversity in our advertising? And so anyone who watches any TV at all, even you would see that there's probably 3 different strands of how buckets that we put them in.
Yeah.
So the first is like the Benetton approach, which is what we, there's this Italian fashion brand back in the, I think, 70s and 80s, who all the advertising featured a whole bunch of people, all from different races, different cultures, and that's the Benetton approach. So you see that, and actually you see that quite a lot in government advertising. If you see government advertising, you see someone, an Indigenous person, someone who's a bit older, a mum and dad, an Asian person.
That very typical stock footage.
Yeah. Except they recruit that stock footage. They actually recruit people to be the stock footage. Yeah. A Muslim who's veiled to represent the Arabic-speaking community, despite the fact that 50% of the Arabic-speaking community in Australia are Christians, and the other half are Muslim.
That's surprising to me, actually.
Well, you would know from popular culture, I know,
yeah,
because you could only see Arabic speakers as veiled
as
people.
Muslims and devout Muslims.
Yeah. So that's a Benetton approach. The other one is it's getting to a blended approach, and you're seeing quite a bit. And you see the Vodafone ad, which is still running at the moment, where you've got and actually it's quite common trait to have the wife as Asian, the husband is Caucasian.
Oh, this actually bugs me. I see that kind of advertising all the time, and it's always like this mixed race couple, and it's always the female part is Asian and the guy is white.
Yeah.
And there's something going on there.
Yeah. And I think there's only one ad that I've seen out of all of it, and it's a superannuation ad that had the husband as an Asian husband, but every other ad has it as and then they have a Euro child, of course.
Yes.
So that's kind of how it's depicted, and so my other job before I came to Identity was I worked at SBS, and my last project at SBS. So I was their national strategy manager. My last job at SBS was to develop a little concept called SBS Pop Asia. So that's the music show that they've got on SBS TV that's still running at the moment. And that was probably the biggest mind changer for Australian audiences, because for once with K-pop, you're actually seeing Asian male as the sex symbol, as the desirable sex symbol,
right? And
not as the effeminate person, and which kind of fits into this thing about Australian media. They can depict the wife as being Asian, because that slots quite well into the passive side of being the wife, but not the strong side, because you can't depict the Asian man as a strong guy in the whole process.
That reminds me of Steven Yeun. Have you watched the TV show Walking Dead?
No.
And I was watching. Steven Yeun is this Korean American actor who had a prominent role in the TV show.
Of course,
And I was just watching one of his interviews, and he was saying there's this sex scene with him and his white girlfriend.
Yeah.
And it was just regarded as this huge event in Korean American community. And their family, how Koreans can be conservative, but they actually gathered together to watch TV, to witness that very moment that this Asian guy is having sex with his white girlfriend.
Yeah.
They thought it's like the first time that Asian male sexuality, this masculinity is acknowledged.
Yeah, that's probably behind the blended approach, that it hasn't quite been acknowledged yet.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of nice because at least, I mean, it's a regression from Benetton, because Benetton is just random people thrown together. This one, at least, there's some sort of context of why they're
trying to mix everything together, although somewhat awkwardly.
It is still quite awkward,
Yeah.
because it feels forced, right?
Yes.
And just about every family at the moment that you see on TV on ads are blended, like just about every family.
Yeah.
So it's gone the other way, where I've actually had Caucasian friends and saying, apparently we don't marry each other anymore. We have to marry sort of Asians. And I'm saying, well, that's what media is telling you should do. And then the final one, which I think, I'm sounding like I'm making judgments in terms of these three approaches, but I think probably I'm not, because I think it could be right for certain genres and certain brands.
Yes.
But I mean, for me, the holy grail is where you should move to what I call the universal truth, where you can have one culture that can actually represent something that's universal to everyone. So you don't necessarily need to be the same skin color to identify with the ad, because it's the universal truth that is attracting you, that you're relating with, not the clothes. Because the other problem with the skin color alone is the case of the Arabic speaker. So what happens if you depict them as veiled, if you're a Christian?
Yeah.
So if you're a Christian Arabic speaker. So that could be probably even more polarizing than trying to attract that person, right? And then the other challenge you have is, or the other problem that presents is, it's having the exact opposite. It's polarizing instead of being engaging.
Uniting. Yes.
Instead of uniting. Yeah. So
a lot of people don't realize that just because we're a minority doesn't mean that we're not diverse within ourselves. Like, nobody would tell from my face that I'm actually a native Chinese. I'm from this Uyghur minority group in China. Among this group of Chinese, there are many different ways of being Chinese, and just because most Chinese people celebrate Chinese New Year, there are a lot of different customs in this context. Trying to out-Chinese the Chinese is just not a winnable battle.
Yeah, and also the other thing is the Vietnamese react really badly too when someone says Chinese New Year, because they're going, well, what about our New Year? So then, and the Koreans don't go as much, but the Koreans as well.
Yeah.
So I think the issue with trying to find, a space that you own could actually, ironically, entrench the differences rather than the similarity.
Yes.
So the third model, and the one which I think is my favourite, doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but it's kind of my favourite, is, NAB ran this really beautiful campaign where it talks, a father is talking about, raising a daughter all the way through to school, her first boyfriend, her graduating from university. And you're totally taking into the journey. You totally relate to it, because you can say, oh, any father relates to, looking after your child and being proud when she graduates.
Yes.
The only difference is that child happened to be an Asian Australian. So the entire thing, it wasn't much blending. It was just a family of Chinese people.
It's actually the human story that really resonates with everyone.
But that's the point. So what we've got to do is cut through the superficial, skin deep.
Yeah.
Well, I feel you should cut through the superficial, skin deep side and talk about the things that are real and true. For example, I might be wearing this blue jacket. Some people might think that it's inappropriate to be wearing a blue. Or if I wasn't wearing a blue jacket, they say, well, he's doing an interview. He really should be wearing a jacket. So we start to think about these things when we should start to think about what is actually more important. Is it the content, or is it this? So you kind of think, the people making the ads, how much effort is being gone into ticking all the various boxes, and how much, when you do a Benetton ad and you've got 50 people in the frame, in the end, do you actually remember what that message is about? Yeah. Or do you see a whole sort of faces and colour?
I just tune out when I see ads like that. I get it. Like, you paid this TV station to air this ad, and I just tune it out. It doesn't really make any impression to me.
That's the thing. A sign of good advertising is something that engages,
Yes.
that you remember beyond, because another ad's going to come in, right?
So on that note, do you have anything that you're particularly proud of?
The ad that we created for SunRice. So SunRice, in their defence, didn't want to go down the usual cliches of red and gold, and so we convinced them to kind of engage by finding that human experience, something that is so that only a Chinese Australian could relate to, and what better than having your Australian neighbour over for dinner for the first time. It says a lot. It's a story of how you're actually now part of Australian society, how you're embracing Australia and how Australia is welcoming you. But it's also a story of how awkward that could possibly be.
Yep.
Because when you have people of different cultures sitting down to a meal together,
Yep.
it can be confronting. The neighbours don't know how to use chopsticks, maybe, and some of the dishes that you serve, like whole fish, because that's what you serve on New Year, might be a bit confronting to children who haven't seen a whole fish served up on a plate before. And from the Asian family's perspective, will they like our food? Will they like what we're doing? Are we doing the right things?
Yeah.
So all those things, they're tensions that a migrant Australian goes through every day when they first come to Australia. Am I, I don't know, is this the right bus to catch? Am I saying, is this the right thing to do? Is this the right etiquette? Am I using the fork and knife right? All those things are enveloped into one dinner party. And in all the research we've done, everyone has said, yes, that is a moment where it's kind of the tipping point. And when it goes well, I mean, that's a sign of success in the new country. And obviously, the ad went well. So,
Yep. That definitely hits a lot closer to home than some dancing tigers and lions and dragons.
yeah, which is after a while you tune off. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the other ad, which I think Apple does. I mean, Apple every year finds in China finds a different aspects of society. And then they make the whole commercial,
Yes.
obviously on an iPhone.
Yep.
But you see, again, Apple is using their phone in a relevant way in that context. They're actually shooting the commercial, right?
Yep.
Rather than just putting their brand onto slap, we call it a logo slap, on an ad. And here we are, a Chinese New Year ad.
Yep.
But this year was about single mothers.
Yep.
I mean, it's obviously an issue that's a big topic in modern China at the moment. And they choose to go down, and everything you said about China is much more diverse than this, monoculture thing. So obviously there's talk about, as the economy opens up, as society changes, and there are single mothers. So they're having a conversation about what it's like to be a single mother in China.
SK2 actually also had a very, very successful campaign in China that's talking about all these feminist issues, because as progressive as China is becoming, well, feminism is always something that needs just more attention, and SK2 just hit it out of the park with that campaign. And it also reminds me of the tragedy of Dolce & Gabbana. That went the opposite route, and they tried, I think they tried to out-Chinese the Chinese. And so in this ad, there's this Chinese model who was dressing very traditionally Chinese and in a very traditionally Chinese settings, and eating eating traditional Italian food with chopsticks, and very awkwardly. It's just not a flattering picture to be filming anyone in, and that caused a huge backlash in China that ultimately just annihilated the very presence of the brand in the biggest luxury market in the world. And that's just the textbook mistake.
And I think the mistakes you can sort of still try to get enough insights to do the right thing. But coming back to that idea of what you said about SK2 and then Apple, if you follow the traditional Chinese New Year marketing handbook, you would never do it, because it's all about auspiciousness, only talking about the right things, only talk about positive things. So
avoiding confrontation.
The Apple ad was about confrontation in the family, right?
It's about harmony, but no, the Apple and SK2 went the other route.
So that's the thing. When you try to follow a cliche rule book, all you can do is stay within the four walls of this very, very boring, and even then you can still make mistakes,
yes.
but this boring framework. But the people who like that point of difference, the people who stand out, it's a whole point of scratching underneath and really understanding what society is about, or at least demonstrating you understand that. It's actually a much better way to engage.
Yeah.
If I was a consumer in China, and I look at the SK2 ad and I look at the Apple ad, I go, hey, this brand gets me. This brand gets me as a Chinese person in this current century, not in the 2 centuries ago.
I think the advantages that brands like Apple and SK2 have is that they actually have local PR and marketing firms that work for them. And the way these companies work is that they don't see Chinese people as Chinese people. They see them as people because they're in China already.
Yes.
So I guess that's the advantage, that they're just not trying to take those imaginary boxes that a typical Australian company would.
But then you should look at the Adidas ad that was filmed by a Chinese company in China, and that has, I would say, more cliches than any other ad. It's got dancing maidens, it's got fans, it's got the Chinese woodblock doors, it's got dumplings, it's got everything that you could possibly, and a logo slap. All they did is they put the Adidas logo in gold at the end.
Yeah, well, they had like multiple Chinese mega stars there, so they probably,
yes, they did, yeah.
So they probably just gave up at that point, and it's like, okay, these names will just carry it. We don't need to put any much effort.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about how businesses should be targeting multicultural markets, and it's actually relatively easier to understand. I mean, even the most racist person would understand that selling your products to vast markets of Asia would just bring you profits. But how would you implement it within your team? Like, I understand that you have an incredibly diverse team, and how does it help you in making all these ads and campaigns?
Yeah, so for a couple of things, we try not just to hire a person just because they happen to come from another cultural background,
right?
But we also hire on skill set, and I think that's what people forget. I mean, I don't want to be known as someone who runs a company just because I'm Vietnamese.
Yeah.
Because you can pick any Vietnamese off the street then. They would qualify, right? You get a cabramatta and anyone can run this company, technically. So I think that's where we're kind of forgetting. That's where even coming back to the idea of the Benetton ad is, if you look the part, you are the part. So we do have an incredibly diverse talent pool, but they are really good at what they do. So, you know, our account director you couldn't find a better attention to detail focus person than Wei. So, and then we've got someone who manages our social moderation. So, and she is another, spectacular talent. We have someone who knows the multicultural media backwards. He happens to be Taiwanese, but that's by the by. I mean, it's a nice to have, but he knows everything about multicultural media. So he's naturally the media manager. So that's what we do. We do need people who are immersed into the culture, to really understand the culture.
That's the very important question, because reasonable people would argue that we shouldn't be selecting people just because they're from a different background. We should be selecting people based on their merits.
Yeah, and having people from different background is great. I'm not saying it's not.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it's not the only criteria.
Yeah.
I don't want society to be the case where just because of my name, and I actually don't want that. I don't want to think that I've got this job or all my other jobs because I have an ethnic name. And then by the same token, I don't want people to lose out on jobs because they have an ethnic name.
I can totally relate to that, because I have been a minority my whole life, wherever I was. And if I do something wrong, that's because of my ethnicity. And if I do something right, that's because of my ethnicity. It's just, people never seem to look past the color of my skin or my race, just to see the content of my character. So as a business owner, how would you suggest the leaders to implement diversity and inclusion in the workplace?
Yeah, I think they have to be really sensible about what they do. They've got to look at how effective it is. And one of the values in our company is goodness. So we always inject goodness in what we do. So we go, we do extend a helping hand, and we do develop people. So there are people in our team who we've hired because we can actually see the talent in them, but they may not have the kind of the smooth social skills that you expect from someone to kind of move up the ranks. So we do flick away at the outer layer, and we look at what they can contribute to the team as a person, and through their skill set. And I think that's what we forget. If we look too carefully at just how the person looks, this isn't everything. Like I know some people who interview really, really well, and it doesn't matter what culture they're from. They interview really well, but they sabotage every company they go to because they've got a personality that just is all about themselves and they're not a team player.
Right.
But they will interview really well. They'll tell you what you want to hear.
They know what to say. Yeah.
They know what to say. So the skill is to unpick all that and find the right person for the team. And that's what I'm saying too. But sometimes we can't just let a person's cultural characteristics completely turn you over and go, I must hire him because he's Vietnamese for some reason. His CV doesn't quite stack up. This other person's better. But we want to do the right thing, and it's well intentioned. I don't think any of it's sort of nasty.
Yeah.
But in the end, my worry about that is when you do that, and if that person goes into their job, and if they're not supported, and if people realise that they're not there for their merit, then people are always going to look at what they're going to do wrong and point the finger, because there's a thing about fairness. Everyone wants things to be fair, and if they don't think it's fair, they're always going to be looking out and going, okay, they're going to be detracted from the beginning.
What are the practical ways that just a typical Australian, maybe small businesses, to increase their diversity? Because as you said, most people are well-intentioned, they want diversity, but sometimes there's only so much they can do. They can only put up a job advertisement on Seek and see who files their resumes. And is there anything they can do?
Well, there's a couple of things. I know a lot of businesses say that because they think it's difficult, but then I see other examples of businesses, in the meat processing industry, in a lot of the other industries, they actually have migrant workers, and when those migrant workers turn out to be such good workers, they actually say to them, "Can you bring your friends in to the company?" Yep. So you actually have companies where a lot of the workforce. It could be like the gym. Yeah. But a lot of the businesses are like that. Yeah. Because once you find really good people, you go, can we find out more people like you so we can actually bring you in? So it does go the other way as well. So businesses can use their network. It doesn't have to be through Seek. It could be through people who work in the company.
So could you also give me an example how you were challenged on diversity? Maybe you weren't looking broad enough, and then because of this diversity within your team, that you were challenged and you felt educated.
Yeah, well, so we hired a Caucasian group account director earlier this year.
That is your diversity hire.
Well, it's kind of strange because when we introduce her, everyone just looks a little bit weird because she's a Kiwi, but she's blonde, right?
Right.
And everyone looks at it funny, and I'm thinking there shouldn't be any issues with that. I'm not challenged by it. I think she does a great job, and she knows the market. She knows the multicultural market really well, and she's been in industry for 6 years. She's really experienced, and we hired her over promoting anyone internally. So it wasn't necessarily a challenge as much for me. I found it was a challenge for everyone around, even the clients, because everyone's going, oh, okay.
I thought you were supposed to.
They didn't say anything, but you can always tell when you introduce.
Yeah.
And by the email, they can see that her name's not, ethnic. And then when they see her, it's even more of a shock. But you know what? After a while, it's absolutely fine because you judge people on what they do, and she happens to be good.
That's actually the point. It's about diversity can bring different perspectives in your team.
Well, you know what? When I hired her, I didn't even think that was an issue.
Yeah.
Because I just happen to know that she's the best person for the job.
You were just selecting her based on her merits.
But what challenged me was the reaction of other people.
Right.
And then that actually did challenge me. And then and it starts to make you think in big presentations, should I be doing the presentation and not her? Then that was a challenge. I'm thinking, no, she should be doing it, because if she was Asian or migrant, I would have no hesitation letting her go in and present it, right? So why do I need to? So I was challenged from that perspective, but I've got to say that happened after I noticed the reaction of clients and other people. So it is a little bit dangerous in that you might think everything's fine, but reactions from other people do actually impact on how you think.
Right. What about in some campaigns you have been through? Like, is there anything that happened in the brainstorming and something just clicked because someone just brought up this completely different perspective that you just never thought of?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of, a little bit of that happened around, and this is ironic, I'm Vietnamese and I'm saying this. I keep on going down the Chinese New Year thing, and I see the Chinese market as China.
Yeah.
And as I kind of mentioned, our media manager is from a Taiwanese background. Yeah. And he's always trying to go, but but there's bigger, broader perspectives to everything. It's not just China is everything, but China is big, how to say. Yeah. But there's a lot more people who celebrate it, and the way people celebrate is different. And it's not just Chinese all the time. There's other Chinese from a whole range of other countries.
Indonesia.
And I, of all people, because I'm Vietnamese, should know that.
Right.
But you kind of get sucked into this thing because that's where the money is, that's where the big audience is, and that's, because we work in WeChat, Weibo all the time. So our mindset is in that mindset. We don't even think about, Kakao Talk for the Koreans. What about the Korean Asian audience? They're affluent, they've got money, but we are closed off from that perspective. So when and then our social media manager person's from Hong Kong. So now there's a real kind of thinking about different perspectives of every possible action now. It's not just like China. Yeah. How does that impact Hong Kong? So she was actually on holidays in Hong Kong during the back then when the demonstrations started. So it starts to make me think about, and even I think the Chinese are just China.
All right, thank you so much. It's a good talk. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Ricky.
Thank you.